Thanks for joining us on Not Boring CEs, where we don't think you should be bored to death while getting your continuing ed. Keep listening here, then hop over to notboringces.com to get all your online CE credits. All right, y'all, let's get to learning. Maggie Holland is a licensed mental health counselor in the state of Washington. She has been practicing since 2018 and currently works in her own private practice. She specializes in working with women that struggle with anxiety, burnout, people-pleasing, perfectionism, and perinatal concerns. She also has extensive experience working with survivors of narcissistic abuse and dysfunctional family dynamics. When she's not working, you can find her cuddled up with a book and her two large dogs, Dipstick and Doodle. Welcome, Maggie. Welcome back to Not Boring CEs. I'm here today with Maggie Holland, and we're going to be talking about humor and its place in a clinical relationship, its place in the therapy room, which I'm super psyched about. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So tell me a little bit about why humor just isn't a given in our clinical relationships. Like, what are some of the myths about what will happen if we have any humor in our lives, in our clinical lives?
Yeah. And, I think the first one, the biggest one is a lot of times I think humor is very much viewed as unprofessional, especially us as therapists. We are wonderful, understanding, supporting of our clients, but we're not always understanding and supporting of each other. I'm sure we have all been in a Facebook group where somebody poses a question and everybody comes for them in the comments that this is unethical. You're being an awful therapist. And so I think humor gets lumped in with that so often as being an unprofessional way to show up. I think this kind of also has some roots in the beginning of our field with Freud, the whole blank slate mentality, and that is the most professional way that we can show up. But humor also allows us to, and Freud thought this too, humor also allows us to access different ways of thinking, different things that maybe we aren't so comfortable expressing directly. And so, yeah, I think that's the first one that gets in the way of just like, man, our nature as therapists is to kind of call each other on what's ethical, what's not ethical. And I know that comes from a good place, but I think that's our first one and biggest one that we got to get out of the way.
Well, and I think the therapist ethical versus not ethical, like that's ethical and not ethical with quotation marks around it. It's not usually based in any of what our licenses say is ethical or unethical.
Yeah.
It's like you're doing something I don't do and I'm not comfortable with, so I'm going to label it as bad.
Yes. Yes. And so for me, I'm a counselor. And so kind of looking at my code of ethics, we're looking at the ACA, right? And, if you look through there, it doesn't ever mention humor directly. But I think what our code of ethics and pretty much any field's code of ethics does mention is kind of for the ACA, it's maleficent. Well, that's a hard word. But basically this boils down to you're not going to do anything that causes your clients harm. And that's a really broad phrase, but it's also a little bit scary because if you look at the code of ethics, do no harm to your clients is literally over the whole thing. Like if you pull that up and put in harm, the whole page and document is going to light up on every single page. So I think a lot of times this gets lumped in with doing harm, and humor absolutely can be harmful. It can be reductionistic, it can be mocking, it can be painful, but there are really respectful and ethical ways to use it. But yeah, I think this boils down to that phrase of do no harm to your clients. And if you're not intentional about it, it absolutely can. Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about another myth that you run up against.
Yes. Yes. So I think another thing that comes up for us as therapists, and I think this one, it can come up as we talk with other therapists too, but there's this perception that we have as therapists that we are supposed to have it like more together than our clients. Like we're supposed to have life figured out and we're supposed to be taking it seriously and doing all the mindfulness and meditation and self-care. And like we are doing all these things to take life seriously and really just do everything correctly. Right. And I think sometimes as you joke with somebody, as you use humor, as you bring levity to a moment that is really, really serious, it can kind of feel like, yes, there's times we avoid with humor for sure. But sometimes the humor can feel like, maybe we don't have it all figured out, or maybe we need to joke about the absurdity of life because there are just absurd things in life. And so I think there is some pressure that we're going to have it more together than our clients.
Yeah, it's
Mhm.
interesting, this pressure, right? And
Mhm.
even if we know we don't have it all together, it's like we're supposed to pretend like we have it all together in session.
Yeah, absolutely.
When like we're all humans, we all share the same feelings. Like
Yep.
there's not a feeling my clients have that I haven't experienced probably recently.
Yeah,
It's just
absolutely.
that like maybe I'm more practiced in tolerating those feelings.
Hmm.
Not
Yep.
always. Sometimes I'm not more practiced than my client. Um,
Absolutely. Yes.
and sometimes I'm like choosing more wisely than I might have
Hmm.
in the past, and that my client
Yep.
maybe, sometimes not.
Yep.
But
Absolutely.
I see how like this being a myth kind of feeds into that whole professionalism thing,
Hmm.
right?
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. And like, life can be a very serious thing. And so I think sometimes this also pulls on our innate desire to want to help, right? Of like a client is coming to us in their deepest pain. That's when they reach out for an intake session. They reach out in their deepest pain and they're saying, please help me.
Mhm.
And, we want to show them we're taking it seriously. We want to show them I can help. I do have it together enough to help. And so I think sometimes in our brain, it's like, who's going to trust me if I joke about it? If I don't have this all together, if I don't have it figured out, are they going to trust me to help them figure it out? And so I think that this can really get in our way sometimes of, the ways that this can help our clients, the ways that this can be really beneficial for us. Um, yeah, I think this gets in the way in a lot of ways for us as therapists.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Well, and I
Yep.
think about like these things are all everything that you've talked about so far, like the professionalism,
Hmm.
the perception that we're harming clients,
Yes.
and the like needing to have our stuff together.
Yep.
Like all of that's based in other people's opinions,
Yep.
views.
Yep. Hmm.
That's not
Yep.
us coming from our own clinical grounded place.
Yeah.
Those
Absolutely.
those fears and those myths all come from our fear of being viewed as not good enough.
Yep. Hmm. Yep. Yeah. And, something I always like to remind people when it comes to like using humor in relationships, like our clients are coming to us when they're struggling the most, right? They're not showing up as their best selves. And it's really, really hard to be in a relationship with somebody and to continue that relation potentially for long term, that some therapists do long term work. It's really hard to stay in relationship with somebody that you don't like, that you don't delight in, that like you don't have some commonalities with, and somebody that is in the throes of their mental illness. They're not going to be able to communicate those things that you would probably really enjoy about them if you hadn't met them in this setting. They can't communicate those things to you very well right now. And
Mhm.
so, humor can sometimes be this way that we bridge the gap and we find commonalities with our clients and we find things to delight in, because all of us have probably had those moments where we love our clients to death. And there are many days where we don't like them, right? And like there are many days that a client shows up and didn't do any of the homework we talked about and didn't make any progress. And, they're like, why is it feeling like this? And you want to like shake them and be like, because you didn't do your homework, right? And so in those moments, I think humor can be like a really basic thing that we can return to look at like the absurdity that you're in therapy and we have homework, right? Like, so we can return to that on a base level and be like, oh, yeah, I am here to help you. We are here together to work this. And so I think humor can be this really basic way we relate with our clients when we don't like them very much.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I love this idea of delighting in our clients. I've never thought of it that way. I think about it like delighting in my kids, but I
Yes.
haven't thought about delighting in my clients. And I realize like that's why I love every client I have. I really do
Yep.
delight in them, even when they're making choices that I'm like, oh, no, 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 not again, you
Yes,
know?
yes, yes, yes. Like, please, please left turn. No, 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 don't do this. I am here in the car with you, but like, please don't drive off the road. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. But the
Yeah.
idea of like, and that I feel like when we have humor in our relationship with our client, even when they're going through a hard time, uh, it's easier to find that delight as a
Yep.
clinician and for them to maybe find some delight in themselves as well, or some
Yeah.
delight in the therapeutic process, which is not an
Yeah.
easy one.
Yeah, no, it's not an easy one. And, we really sit through the most painful moments of some people's lives that their family and friends don't get to see sometimes.
Mhm.
And, not only that, but humor, if we bring it in and we do it in a respectful way, we do it in an intentional way.
Mhm.
There's a lot of research that actually shows that we are more likely to have positive outcomes or clients to feel positive outcomes and for us to also feel that there was a positive outcome with this
Mhm.
client. Now, that's if we use it intentionally, that's if we use humor respectfully, right? The big caveat. But it almost helps us ensure that we help the client to get there. And so it always blows my mind seeing it in these Facebook groups when people say don't joke around about things, or self-disclosure is kind of in the same realm of you have to be careful and intentional about how you do it.
Mhm.
But it can be so helpful to help us connect with our clients initially, to stay connected with our clients, and really help them get where they are trying to go with a
Mhm.
little bit less resistance. Hopefully that's the ideal, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like that, a little bit less resistance. I mean, I
Mm-hmm.
know the very first therapist I ever had in my life was a blank slate therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
as a very deeply insecure teenager, I could
Oh
not
gosh.
tolerate that because I just knew everything she was thinking about me were all the things I hated about myself, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She would
Yeah.
never have cracked a joke. She would never,
Yeah.
like, it was outside the realm. Now, I think that there's some blank slate therapists out there who do great work, but they weren't
Yeah.
going to do it with me.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
there's
Mm-hmm.
this sense of like, different people are going to work for different clients. If you've got a super stoic
Yes.
client, they don't have a funny bone. They're like not interested. They've never laughed at stand-up comedy, all of that. Like
Yeah.
probably not the person to do
Yeah.
like a joke with,
No.
or find some humor in anything.
Yeah.
But I think the
Absolutely.
majority of us probably appreciate that
Yeah.
uh, humorous uh, kind of injection into the clinical
Yes.
relationship so that it's not so damn heavy.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And I think with some of that too of like we can totally talk about how do we use humor
Mhm.
ethically in the room. We can talk about that later, but a big piece of this is reading the room, right? Like
Yeah.
knowing what kind of clients you're working with, and there's a lot of blank slate therapists out there that are absolutely wonderful, and they can work really well with somebody who trends towards using a lot of humor as a deflection, as an avoidance. Like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, yes, like I am not your therapist. If that is
Mhm.
something that you do, I'm going to call you on it, but it's going to be a huge thing I have to work through too, and that's my job as the therapist. But to a blank slate clinician, they're going to have a much easier time calling that out and challenging that because they don't naturally tend towards doing that. So much of this is reading the room, knowing your clients, knowing yourself. But yeah, if run of the mill client talking about, I'm not going to say run of the mill because we all have our special stuff, but you know, a lot of clients really, really appreciate an injection of some like laughter because this is heavy work and a lot of this sucks. Like,
Yeah.
when clients come in, I say this sucks and then it sucks more and then hopefully it sucks less. And that's what we're aiming for. So hang in there.
Mhm.
But yeah, a lot of it sucks. So a lot of clients appreciate it.
Yeah. And we're going to talk in a little while about how to use humor intentionally and respectfully. We're going to
Yep.
get to that for those who are like, okay, but how? I promise we'll
Yeah.
get there.
Yeah.
But can we talk about some of the benefits for clients for us to
Yeah.
bring that injection of humor in?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first one I always like to mention is, they are building a relationship with essentially most of the time a stranger that they met on the internet, right? Like they don't know anything about us, we don't know anything about them. And so humor can be the way that a client begins testing the waters and begins to, okay, I'm going to express this absurd thing that I'm struggling with in a little bit of a joking way. And we're going to kind of see how that lands, right? That's basic relation building for everybody, and our clients are no exception. And so sometimes humor can be a way to test and look at what is the communication expectations from this person that I met on the internet. Yes, they're a therapist, but what are the communication expectations? What are the things that she really connects with I'm a female. So what are the things she really connects with? You know, and it can also be a way for them to begin testing communication skills that they might not have gotten to test with other people in their life before, right?
Mhm.
Because humor is, for most of us, ingrained in our life. That is part of our everyday relationships. You know, we joke with our partners, we joke with our kids, we joke with our friends. Hopefully, you can joke with your family, right? And so that's a natural relational pattern. And some people haven't gotten to practice that before. They don't know how to practice it. And so I think first and foremost, it's a really important tool for expression that our clients get to practice with us, and they get to use it to get to know us, and we get to use it to get to know them. Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
It's
Hmm.
interesting because I think about that, the snarky humor that people will
Hmm.
sometimes use, like they get to
Hmm.
practice, they get to have real feedback
Yep.
from a
Hmm.
therapist because that's our job to be
Yes.
like, oh, that feels like one of those jokes that you make where like there's a truth underlying it that you may need to express.
Yes.
Is there
Absolutely.
something you want to say to me? I'm really interested in hearing it, and
Yep.
I'm eager for you to express yourself in a way
Yes.
that like their best friend and their mom's not going to respond in that way.
Yes.
They're just going to
Yes.
be like, she did it again, that passive aggressive bullshit,
Yep.
And
Yes.
so it's a
Hmm.
great way for people to be able to like practice humor
Hmm.
in ways they can take into their real life.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in ways to understand, because in that snarkiness, right? That's like a reductionistic, painful way that humor can be used. Because if that client is using that snarkiness in their family dynamics, right? But then also saying, I have no idea why everybody's mean to me when I go home for holidays. If you allow humor to come into the room and you get to say, that's maybe why everybody's being kind of mean. Are you saying these things to your family? Because like that's probably it, or that's part of it, right?
Hmm.
And so when we allow the full client to come into the room, even their humor in the most delightful ways and their humor in the most painful ways,
Hmm.
like that's another piece of themselves. And then we get to work with that. Versus if we don't welcome humor into the room, oftentimes by leading by example, if we don't welcome that into the room, we're missing a whole piece of the puzzle of like what is happening in these relationships that aren't working.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'm
Hmm.
just thinking like we're modeling that intentional, respectful humor
Yeah.
that they can
Absolutely.
then see that they don't have to be snarky to be funny.
Yep.
They
Yes.
can still make people laugh. They can still get that reaction that they're looking for from some people in their
Yep.
lives without
Yes.
putting anyone down or anything like that.
Yeah, yeah, because as therapists, it's our job first and foremost to be the place they test things, right? And we
Hmm.
give honest feedback if that did not land, right?
Yeah.
And talk about what made you make that joke that did not land. And like, if I saw you in a public setting and you said that to me, like, this would be my reaction.
Hmm.
And so, first and foremost, we get to be the testing grounds and we have to hold that. And so, really being aware of like, when humor comes into the room, this is just another tool for us to work with to understand our client, for them to understand us. Yeah, it's
Hmm.
really important that we allow space for that.
Hmm.
Mhm. Yep. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk some about um, just laughter in general, because
Yep.
I think there's great clinical benefit there.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So laughter, I'm gonna try not to go full nerd on everybody, but
We love nerd
laughter.
here. We love it.
Great, good. So, laughter essentially, it kind of a big thing that it does for us as we're laughing, is it releases dopamine, right? And so, in the therapeutic room, why that is specifically really important for us as therapists to make sure that there is some laughter, that there is some humor, because dopamine, when it's activated, it actually helps enhance learning. So, the things you're talking to your clients about, if you can, not all the time. I'm not asking everybody to be a clown in their sessions, right? Or a stand up comedian. But if we can infuse some laughter, particularly if it's a topic a client's been struggling with or something they've been struggling to practice, it actually enhances the ability to recall information and learning. It helps build motivation, and it helps clients to stay focused. Now, all of those things obviously apply to us as well, but that's some really awesome things for us to work with as therapists to
Mhm.
help clients get to where they're trying to go, which is our job, right? And
Yeah.
so, enhancing learning, enhancing motivation, enhancing a client's attention and retention of information, Oh my gosh, that is like what we want our clients to do every week. That's, what we're here for. And I think it's really important too that if a client is laughing with somebody, they also get the added benefits of the serotonin of connecting with another person,
Mhm.
because now that laughter is shared. So if you do it by yourself, you're watching a funny cat video, sure, you get all of these benefits. If you do it with somebody else, you get even more benefits and your brain feels even better. So there's a lot of just in your brain, the soup of neurotransmitters, wonderful things that happen when we laugh,
Mhm.
especially with other people. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
love it.
Yeah. And, if most of us in this field have read the Burnout book by the Nagoski sisters,
Love it.
wonderful book. If you haven't
Mhm.
read it and you're listening to this, please go pick up a copy and take care of yourself. But a
And
big
it's
thing,
called burnout.
yes,
Something,
yes,
something, completing the stress cycle.
yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
read
Yes.
it.
And you will recognize it in a bookstore because it says burnout like 5 times in red. Pick it up.
Mhm.
Um, but a big thing that they talk about in there is this idea of completing the stress cycle, right? And this idea that in modern society that we have stressors that come up, but we aren't always physically reacting and completing that stress cycle to get that stress processed out of our body. Because somebody sends a mean email and you're not going to literally run away from your computer or fight them. So we don't get to complete the stress that comes into our bodies very often. And so laughter, and particularly laughter with somebody else, is a huge way that we can complete that stress cycle.
Mhm.
And so it's a huge stress management tool as well. So for our clients, as we're talking to them about how important it is to process the stress out of their bodies, it's important for us to model that and bring that into the session too. And we can't, if you do walk and talk therapy, you're doing it. But for therapists that are classically sitting in an office and we're not able to move around a whole lot, we don't really hug clients. And so this is a way that we can ethically complete the stress cycle with a client in session
Mhm.
together. And we can model that and call out, this is what this is supposed to feel like when you process that stress out of your body. Um, we can be creative too for those art therapists out there and expressive arts therapists. You can do that in a session, but yeah, this is a way for people who, like me, maybe are not so artistic. I don't do walk and talk therapy. This is a way that I can help clients complete the stress cycle actively in session, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I love this idea because so many of the things in their book, so they basically walk you through like, here are a number of things you can do to complete your stress cycle. Pick one, go with it, try the others, go with it.
Mhm.
You don't have to do all of them, but like, one of them is sex. We're not gonna have sex with our
Yep.
clients.
No,
We're not
please
gonna
don't.
like there are all these things that we're not gonna do. Um, but this one is accessible to all of us
Yep.
for the most part. I mean, not
Yep.
everybody's funny. Not
Yeah.
everybody's into
Sure.
humor, but the
Sure.
majority of therapists can respectfully and intentionally bring humor into their session. And
Yes.
they might be thinking the thing and just feeling like they're not allowed to say it out loud.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
And and that I think that highlights another really big benefit for our clients is, you're thinking something and you're not going to say it out loud. This is also a really good way for clients to practice risk taking. Like, make that joke with me. I'm telling you I'm a safe person. Make that joke with me. Let's see if it lands. And then, sure, we're going to tell them if it doesn't land, but we're going to do it in a kind way that says it was safe to try that risk and have got you. And like, let's alter your technique a little bit maybe.
Hmm.
But I think that highlights something that's really helpful for our clients too, is it helps them practice risk taking. And this is particularly ugh, particularly important for people who have like social anxiety and struggle to relate to other people. You get to practice that here, and we're going to practice taking that risk of making the joke and drawing the attention to yourself and sitting in that and regulating yourself as the attention is on you because you made a really funny joke. Yeah, so I think that actually rolls in really well. That's another benefit for clients. There's
Hmm.
so many benefits. It's so great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Um, let's talk some about like psychological flexibility because that feels
Mhm.
like it has an important part in this.
Sure. Yeah. So psychological flexibility, core component of ACT. I always want to say ACT when I see it. For all you ACT therapists out there, I'm doing it right. So ACT, it comes from that, right? Which is basically psychological flexibility is being present in the moment, and whatever is coming up and happening in the moment, in the current situation, being aware of it, not necessarily trying to change it, but like we're kind of rolling with it a little bit, right? And we're going to show up intentionally with whatever this is. I'm going to stay true to myself, true to my values, and I'm going to show up in an intentional way, even if the thing showing up is really, really hard, right? Um, and so excuse me, people who struggle sitting in the moment with things, especially things that are really, really hard, humor can kind of be their first way to start doing this because it feels a little bit less threatening sometimes, right? Of like, oh man, this emotion, like let's say I'm learning to sit with anger, right?
Mhm.
And that's really, really uncomfortable for me to sit with anger. If we can kind of like make a joke about it, if we can kind of bring some levity to the situation, it can make anger feel not so heavy, right? All of a sudden, okay, it can be a little bit funny. I am so mad at the slow walker on the sidewalk, right? Woo, I just want to like zoom past them and make a mean comment. And like, I am struggling to just sit in the anger. I don't want to be a person that says mean comments to people. I'm struggling to sit in this, right? Um, in your brain, you can go through what are all the ridiculous things I would even say to this person if I zoomed by and made a mean comment. All of a sudden it kind of diffuses that a little bit and it helps us sit with, okay, I'm angry and there are a lot of choices that I can make right now. There are some absurd ones. There are some that I really actually want to do in real life, but it can kind of help us bridge the gap and sit with what is here right now. And that's a big thing as therapists we do for clients, but sometimes it's hard, right? Especially as we get into anger is a hard one for people to sit with. Grief is a hard one to sit with. And so these really heavy emotions that it can feel like they're drowning us, sometimes bringing a little bit of levity to it. Again, not in a reductionistic way, but bringing a little bit of levity to it can make it a little bit more tolerable for our clients. And if it feels a little bit more tolerable, they're able to make more intentional choices about how am I going to show up as I'm grieving? How am I going to show up as I'm really pissed off? And when they show up more intentional, they feel better about themselves. There's a whole bunch of great things that happen when clients can make intentional choices. And so sometimes for clients that really struggle to tolerate, humor is like the bridge of the gap to do that. It's like sticking your toe in the water instead of jumping in head first. So yeah, hugely helpful for flexibility and mindfulness and sitting with whatever feelings come up.
Love it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about like just the positive feelings that happen
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
among
Yeah.
like when I'm with somebody and we're laughing, right?
Yeah.
The dopamine, everything that's happening that you talked about that we got to geek out on for a second. But
Yes.
also just like they're able to delight in us
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
And we're able to
Absolutely.
delight in it. And it's like the
Yes.
relationship is delightful, even though
Yes.
sometimes it's really hard.
Yeah, absolutely. And even though sometimes this can kind of be one of those times where we also get to model holding both for clients too. There are absolutely times, I mentioned grief earlier. There are times we can be sitting there crying with our clients because the grief that they've been through is so heavy, or whatever thing they've been through is so heavy. And, also there's humor in it too,
Mm-hmm.
and so those times when we can show clients we can hold both, or we can delight in them and they delight in us back, um, so I've got this phrase I picked up in grad school. I had a professor say it to me one time, but you know, helping our clients seek what she called the good soup of life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of like a really good soup fills you up, it nourishes you, like if it's soup season, and that is the best thing that could happen to you is have a really good soup, right?
Mm-hmm.
I might be a really big soup fan. I don't know,
I am
but
too. I'm with you.
oh, I love soup. Big soup fan. I really need a t-shirt that says that. But so like the good soup of life, right? It nourishes you, it fills you up, like it's just the best, hits the spot. And so when we get to delight in somebody else and they get to delight in us at the same time, and we have this moment of really beautiful, just pure connection, I think that's a good soup of life, isn't it? Right. And
Mhm.
so many of our clients come in oftentimes because they're isolated and they haven't had that good soup in their childhood, in their adult relationships, in their dating. And so I think also one of the most basic things we can do is kind of show clients this is what good soup of life feels like. This is what good soup in relationships feel like.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I bet you didn't expect a soup metaphor to come in today, did you,
I
Allison?
mean, I love it. It's good. I'll take it on a cold winter's day.
Yes, absolutely. So I think kind of showing our clients this is what delighting in your relationships looks like, and this is what it feels like, and this is how it happens in a way that doesn't also hurt, hopefully. So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So to
absolutely,
me, that also just like sounds so pleasant clinically as a therapist.
yeah.
Can we
Mhm.
talk some about the benefits of using humor in session for therapists?
Yes, absolutely. Yep. Um, humor is one of those things, and laughter is one of those things. It rarely goes one direction. And if it does, it's something clinically we're talking about, still useful, right? But for us on our side, um, basic as we're starting out, kind of going back to clients using it for a tool of expression, for us, this can be a really great way to begin our rapport building, right? So, all that dopamine that comes out, oxytocin that comes out, which is our bonding chemical. We want our clients to feel bonded to us. And so that helps begin that process when we do it respectfully and thoughtfully. Um, and I think another thing with the rapport building is if we use humor and laughter, it can be a way for us to ethically self disclose that doesn't make it necessarily all about us. Right.
Hmm.
And so, if a client is sharing something that they're struggling with, and you say, this is reminding me of this meme that I saw on Instagram today, and this is feeling similar. Does that land? Right? You have just disclosed a lot of things without making it about yourself. You're saying, I'm on Instagram. I'm with it. I'm funny. I look at the memes, right? Like
Hmm.
I get the jargon. Um, and so this is a way for us to self-disclose that doesn't necessarily make it about us.
Hmm.
So I think this can be a really, really important tool for rapport building and helping clients get comfortable and kind of do that attaching to us so that we can work the therapeutic relationship. Yeah.
Yeah. What I'm thinking too about completing the stress cycle, sometimes sessions are really heavy for us
Yes,
and we're holding a
absolutely.
lot. And so it
Yes,
doesn't just complete the stress cycle for them or at least get
yep,
it started. It can do it for us in session too.
absolutely. Yes, yes. It's the burnout book where I'm like, everybody go get this book and read it. It's so important for us to complete that stress cycle as well. And
Hmm.
so, laughter, if you have a back-to-back day, don't recommend it. Take Allison's courses. If you have a back-to-back day and you might not necessarily be able to take a really long walk, if you had a really heavy session, you might not be able to take a walk and process some of that out so that you can sit really well for your next client. Now, I know all of us work to sit our best that we can after a heavy session. I believe in everybody. And also, it can be really hard, right? And
Hmm.
so, if we infuse some humor into most of our clients' sessions, it can kind of help get us to the end of the day while still being pretty mentally clear. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What else is a benefit for clinicians with humor?
yeah, yeah. And I think another one that the play therapists out there are going to be so happy I'm saying this is that humor and joking with another person in adulthood is a way that we can re-engage with play that feels a little bit more natural. Play is pretty essential when we're kids to understanding our world, processing things that have happened to us. And those needs are pretty basic. They don't necessarily go away just because we become adults. We are just told by society we need to stop playing.
Hmm.
And so, okay, that's one of the most efficient ways that kids play. That's one of the most efficient ways that they learn. Then we get to adulthood and we make it way harder on ourselves, right? Like stop playing, just figure this out like an adult, right? And so I think that humor can be a way that we relate to clients, sure, but it can also be for us a way that we play with clients in a way that's still ethical for both us, that still doesn't harm the client, And play is really, really important. It's important to play with your kids if you have them, sure, but it's important to have play in our relationships, including our therapeutic relationships. It's important to have some level of play at work. Otherwise, you're probably going to be miserable.
Mhm.
And so I think play is really important, even for us as adults. And humor is a way that we can socially acceptably play.
Yeah.
Highly recommend play for everybody, but also if you're just getting your toe back in that water, proverbially, yeah, humor can be a way that we play, like a play on words or puns. I know there's going to be people that groan out there. Puns are the lowest form of humor, but puns are like a play on words, right?
Mhm.
And so it's kind of using your brain in that playful way of, that spontaneity and that's, processing the world and looking from a different point of view. I think play can be really helpful, and humor is a way that adults can do it a little more
Mhm.
comfortably.
I love that. And I think about, so I had to get reintroduced to play probably 2021 because
Mhm.
got so miserable through the whole staying in my house experience. And as
Yes.
a hardcore extrovert, it was very hard for me.
Yes.
um, and so um, in 2021, I was like, I'm so miserable and not myself, and I don't
Yeah.
know what's missing.
Yeah.
And so I was like, well, what was fun when I was young? And I ended up signing up for an improv class.
Yes.
And now, I mean, I've been doing improv since then pretty much every week. And
Yep.
it is my playtime. Like we
Yes.
literally, like the improv community where I live will be like, oh, let's play.
Yeah.
And it has helped bring out other forms of play, like banter with my husband. When we were
Yeah.
dating, we bantered constantly.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
15 years of marriage, we're instead like, well, who's going to drive who here? And it
Yeah.
became so much more like less fun and goofy. Like we would
Yes.
go to stand up together and laugh
Yeah.
there, but there wasn't as much laughter between us. And
Yes.
when we get the banter going, I'm like, oh, my
Yeah.
body needed this.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
and I'm
Hmm.
able to delight in him and he's able to delight in me. And I
Yes.
think this idea of like being an adult, for
Hmm.
some reason, we took on this idea that we weren't supposed to be playful, that it is
Yeah.
for children, like you were
Yes.
saying, like,
Yep.
but we really, really need to reconnect to that play to be whole people.
Yeah. Yeah. We adulted too hard and lost the play. That's
Yeah,
not a good thing.
we were
Yeah.
trying to do it right.
Well, and everybody told us this is the right way to do it. So we're like, okay. And then we go do it. And then we're like, wait, why am I so miserable? Wait,
Yeah.
why are we all anxious and depressed? Like,
Hmm.
play is not going to solve all those issues, but yeah, this is probably a really big foundational thing. If I had to guess, of that, life is absurd, having some levity to it, having some play, flirting with your partner, those,
Hmm.
all the good brain chemicals come out when we play, right? Like
Hmm.
all of that feels really good. And we have those connection moments, on a really basic way that says, again, I delight in you and you delight in me. Oh my gosh, that's what relationships are supposed to be, right?
Hmm.
So we don't have that delight. Yeah, they don't feel great. They feel really transactional a lot of times. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. Yes. Yeah.
I'm thinking about the modeling of vulnerability too.
Yes.
Like,
Mhm.
let's talk some about that.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. And so vulnerability, right? Essentially, what that is we're kind of like offering our heart up on a plate, and oftentimes our clients struggle with vulnerability. Most of us do. It's a really scary thing to feel because when we offer our heart up on a plate, somebody can accept it and nurture it and protect it. And that feels really lovely. And people can also reject it. People can also, well, this is a little graphic, but people can also stab it, right?
Yeah.
And so that is a really scary thing of knowing like I can have best case, I can have worst case by offering some vulnerability right now. And so I think humor, again, bridges the gap. And I think that this can be a way that, if I present a funny interpretation of the world, right? Like, oh my gosh, how ridiculous are credit scores? Why do we have those? Right. And like, so weird that we live in a world that has credit scores and lava lamps. What is that? Right. Like,
Hmm.
and so I present a funny interpretation of the world, and you are totally allowed to reject it. You are welcome to come back to me with like, well, this is why we have credit scores and this is what it is. And like, this is the science behind a lava lamp. And like, if you know that information, I'd be super interested to hear it. And I'm probably going to go Google it after this of like, how does a lava lamp work? But we are literally, as we do that as therapists and as we do that as human beings, we are literally offering to the other person a glimpse into our personal world. This is how my brain ticks. This is what I think of this. This is an opinion I have on this, right? When we say, here's a funny thing in the world, we are saying lava lamps are absurd. They're cool, but they're absurd, right? And so I'm offering that to you, and it's not overtly about me, right? Like, I think you should have no lava lamps in your house, right? Like, it's not overtly about me, but we give that other person the power to reject it. We give them the opportunity to accept it, or we give them the opportunity to like meet us in the middle and work it together, right? Like, oh my gosh, imagine a world where we have to live inside lava lamps. That's working this absurdity together, right? And I think that that can be really vulnerable, but it can be kind of a way that we enter into vulnerability with clients. Again, this gives them a chance to practice. This gives us a chance to practice. But it kind of can give some neutral ground when it comes to how to be in relation with another person, which is inherently really vulnerable. You can reject any of that at any point in time. There's nothing I can say or do about it. I can stop offering vulnerability and I can stop offering ways for you to reject me. But it's kind of like it can be an entrance into vulnerability that we model for our clients, that we do for ourselves, that maybe isn't so serious. And so if the rejection happens, it feels a little less personal. And so we can come back and do it again. But yeah, at the core of it, a lot of times humor also requires a lot of vulnerability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about that. You just said something about like I lost your words, but like making something not quite so heavy. And just thinking about there is a kind of shake it off vibe that can be helpful. We don't want to diminish the pain that somebody's in. There is an intentional and respectful way to use humor with that. Can we talk some about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you can't tell, I use shake it off as I use that all the time. I'm a big Swiftie. I know you are too. Like,
yes.
And so like shaking it off, like so much of our world is absurd and there is so much pain in our world. There are ridiculous things in our world. There's so much that is outside of our control. And if we really stay focused there, that can really leave us feeling stuck, right? Particularly, we have no influence and control over things. Sometimes things just suck and we just have to make it through this sucky period, you know? And so I think sometimes that humor can be a way that we can begin that movement of shaking things off. You know, there's a lot of motion in shaking something off, and that can feel like a really big change if you've been stuck. And so I think humor can be a way that we can begin that movement. We can begin getting comfortable with shaking things off, because, you know, at the end of the day, if there's something sucky that's happening and we just have to make it through it, what are you going to do? You know, we can wallow in it, and also we can, how do I sit with this and keep moving forward, you know? And so, you know, I have a colleague that gave me this example one point in time. She's a couples counselor. God bless couples therapists out there.
Oh my gosh. So grateful for y'all.
I'm so grateful. I will refer to you all day. You are doing the really hard work. But so I had a colleague that gave me an example one time of this couple came in and the wife was like, man, I'm just really focused on keeping everyone happy. I just noticed that this week and I can't shake it. And honestly, I want to do that. I just want to keep everybody happy. I want to keep the equilibrium. And so my colleague, she responded back. She's like, okay, cool. Let's focus this entire session on figuring out how do we keep everybody in your family happy at all times. Let's figure that out. She said it with a straight face. She said, right. And then the partner piped in and was like, wait a minute, I actually don't think that's possible. And they kind of just looked at each other. She's like, welcome. This is what the session's going to be about. Like,
Love
yeah,
it.
And so it can feel, so that's an example of, it can feel really scary if we don't maintain the equilibrium. It can feel really hard to tolerate, particularly as a mom. If your kid is struggling, if your kid is having a big feeling, it is hard to tolerate when your kid's not happy. It's hard to tolerate when your partner's not happy. you know? And so I absolutely understand this draw. And also, that's one of those uncontrollable things in life, right? That's
Mhm.
one of those things that can leave you feeling stuck. And so if somebody is so in that mindset, this can be a way that we kind of rattle that cage and say, I don't know that this is actually the best thing here. And can offer that without being judgmental. It can kind of like this, we offer that vulnerability, we offer that space, and that client could totally have rejected it and it would have been fine, you know.
Mhm.
But we offer that interpretation, and it's kind of here is a lifeline. Maybe grab a hold of it. Nope, not yet. Okay, you stay in there. I'm here, right? But here's a lifeline. Why don't you grab the life preserver? Let's figure something else out. Yeah.
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 Yeah. I'm thinking of like all the times I've done that in session without fully realizing. I mean, like I knew what I was doing, but without thinking about it of how it is like a shake it off kind of a response. So I love
Yeah.
any sort of Taylor weave
Yes.
in.
Yes. So like humor is like our way of like we shake it off a little bit. It can be. And so it can be really helpful with that, you know, particularly clients that are stuck, and how
Mhm.
most clients that come to us are stuck in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
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 So I'm eager for us to get into like, okay, so how do we use humor in therapy?
Yeah.
I also want to talk about like how to respond to humor in therapy. We could tag that on at the end
Yes.
because
Absolutely.
I do work with a lot of people who are going to use humor to deflect.
Yes.
And like sometimes I'm like, that's funny.
Yeah.
And I gotta I
Yeah.
gotta moderate my response. But
Yes. Yes. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And so, you know, speaking on just that one first and foremost, right? Of like, that can be a way that we allow our humanness to show and our vulnerability to show. And like, you know, I think in therapy, something really important for us to acknowledge is there is an inherent power dynamic differential that at least clients perceive. And we might work our butts off trying to get the client not to feel that power dynamic as acutely. But at the end of the day, you know, clients come in viewing us as like the expert. And, you know, we do have all these years of training and experience and CEUs and all these things. And so to some extent we are, right?
Mhm.
And so I think with some of that of like also showing our humor and like showing our humanness can kind of bring us to that level of like, okay, we're on the same page here. Of like, client makes a self-deprecating joke and man, it was on point. And like, do they know themselves? And like, do you have insight? Yes. But to change your behaviors, no, right? And so I think there is something to be said for like throwing your head back and laughing about that, and then afterward coming back and being like, okay, but bring it around, like that was self-deprecating, and like let's talk about it, like dang, that was funny. And
Mhm.
also, and you got me. And
Mhm.
also, we got to talk about that. Right. And so, yeah, it can totally be a way to deflect, and it can totally be a way to avoid things. But in that, you know, I always like to look at like, is there a purpose to this behavior? And so for some people, if they haven't had that good soup in their family relationships growing up, cracking that funny joke was maybe the closest thing that they could get to a connection with a caregiver or a sibling or somebody. That might have been the closest way that they can ensure connection. So
Mhm.
also looking at like, what is the purpose of this? Maybe it's to deflect and also to get that need filled of I need to connect with somebody. And so, yeah, there's ways that clients can use it that aren't helpful. And but I do think acknowledging it, if it's funny, laugh at it. You
Mhm.
can always loop back around and be like, all right, but that was self-deprecating. Like, let's talk about it, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
thinking about one of my clients who like makes me crack up every single session.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm going to make up something that she would totally say,
Mhm.
rather than disclosing things she has said. But like if somebody um inconvenienced her in a pretty significant way, she might come into session and be like, "Oh, well, Maggie did X, Y, and Z, so obviously I need to make her wish she was never born now."
Yeah.
Like, which she's not going to do. She's
Yes.
not going to do,
Yes.
but she's having fantasies about it.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So I'll be like, brilliant. While you're plotting, maybe we can
Yes.
talk about the way that uh, you're hurt that she inconvenienced you and
Yes.
the plan for getting your life back to whatever position you wanted or needed it in.
Yes.
So it's like acknowledging, like, yeah, that was funny.
Yes.
And like, I love that her humor always goes towards the dramatic.
Yes,
which
absolutely.
is something we're working on. So
Yes.
it's always a great example of like, oh, look,
Yes.
um, you're tending towards a little drama. Like this is a little smidge dramatic for the situation. Um, can we
Mhm.
talk about how big the feelings really are?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
so there's that validation, and also like you're doing your job as a therapist by
Yeah.
naming the thing and taking it from there.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and calling it out. And also, it's normal to like plot against, like mentally have a fantasy of plotting
Oh
against
yeah.
somebody who wronged you. Like us holding space for that and like, yep, go ahead and plot. And also why I'm here, right? Of like,
Right.
because I'm not your henchman, I'm not your minion, I'm not your sidekick. So, like, okay, I'm going to stay in my lane. Lovely. Do what you're going to do. Don't do what you're going to do because that's something we have to work with, right? But like, I hear you. That is valid. And also, yeah, I
Mhm.
think that can be really, really powerful. Like just that normalization and that validation. Because just thinking about that client hypothetically in this situation, most people in her life probably say, oh my gosh, you're being dramatic. Just chill.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when we say, okay, cool, plot away. And also, let's react in a way that's appropriate for this situation. Like, let's stay true to who we are. Let's talk about those feelings. I think that first piece, we sometimes underestimate how powerful it is of like, totally valid to want to plot.
Mhm.
Gotcha. And also, the piece that comes after that, that's where I get to step in, you
Right.
know?
Right.
Yeah.
And if I wanted to stay in the humor
Yep.
selfishly because she's
Sure.
funny,
Yes.
then I would be like, tell me what's the plan. But I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that because that's spending our clinical time
Yep.
on things that aren't really clinically relevant for
Yes.
our goals.
Yes, absolutely. And so I think this one, a big thing to remember is if you're thinking about using humor in therapy, you're highlighting a really great one of like n- not acting like in a way that we collude in the avoidance of like the
Mhm.
feelings, right? Because humor can be a huge deflection of feelings.
Yeah.
It can be also a really great little peek inside all those feelings. Like this example of like, okay, as you're plotting, let's talk about the feelings that are motivating you plotting this thing that happened 5 days ago or
Mhm.
whatever it is. Right. And so recognizing and really being mindful of reading the room of like what's happening here so that we don't accidentally collude in the avoidance.
Mhm.
Um, and if you end up hanging there for a second or so, okay, that's all right. Your humanness is showing, right? But
Mhm.
ultimately, it's our job to read the room, to be mindful, to be monitoring the interaction and what's happening. And is it therapeutic? And it's really easy to collude in the avoidance, especially if there's something for you as a clinician that you don't feel maybe I don't have the training or I don't have the skill or I'm nervous that this thing comes up, right? And so
Mhm.
if you notice that happening, okay, that's just information for you to work with and go get training on that thing or go consult on that thing. But really, I like to use the word colluding specifically. One, it's wonderful. Two, it's kind of a heavy word, right? Like,
Mhm.
so colluding in the avoidance is what I usually like to say with that one of like, it's easy to do. We're all humans, it happens. But really monitoring the room and monitoring that relationship, that's our job. So if you notice, okay, I am colluding in a lot of avoidance. Yeah. Okay. We're going to look at other ways that we can work with that and also get training, get consultation, get support. It's
Mhm.
probably happening for a reason and it's okay. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
What are some other
So,
considerations?
yeah. So I think, biggest one, obviously, in the beginning of the relationship, ease into it, the one I used of like, oh, this is giving me the vibe of that meme I saw on Instagram, right? Like that can be a way to ease into it. If somebody says like rejection and like, oh, I'm not on Instagram, I don't look at memes, I don't find those things funny. Okay, that's just your information to work with of like ease back, right?
Mhm.
And so a lot more reading the room with that one. Um, so yeah, basically read the room all the time. The other just general suggestions I like to give, keep it PG, right? Like unless you're a client like I only work with adults, mostly only work with women for the most part. I can totally cuss, right? Like
Mhm.
R-rated movie gets one F word every movie, right? Like so I cuss, I'm on an adult level, but for the most part if you're not sure, you're still building the relationship, keep it PG, see how it goes, see how it lands and adjust from there. right?
Yeah.
Um,
And I think like language is probably something we can be a little more flexible with it versus like sexual content, because a lot of our
oh yeah,
clients aren't telling us the
yeah,
deeper sexual stuff going on unless
yes,
it's, unless that's
yes,
what they're coming in for.
yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And if they're coming in, like, let's say that somebody is coming in for a sex addiction or a porn addiction, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes using humor can like release some of that shame. It can kind of shake it up a little bit of like, okay, if I can joke about this a little bit with my therapist in respectful ways, in appropriate ways, like, man, sexual content is one that you really need to tread with caution.
Mhm.
But if we can joke about things a little bit, the basis of shame is this is something abhorrent about myself. This is a flaw in me, and I need to hide it. I need to make sure nobody sees this. And so, if we can, again, bridge that gap, I feel like that's my phrase today. We can bridge that gap and we can make some lighthearted jokes about it. Then sometimes we can release some of that shame. You're spot on, though, that sexual content is absolutely probably the biggest area we need to be careful, because that's, the horror stories of someone bringing complaint to a licensing board. Now you lose your license, right? Like,
Mhm.
this is one of those areas. Be careful with humor in this area, but language is a lot more flexible. Reflecting a client's experience back to them of like, man, it feels like there's an elephant sitting on your chest. How are you even breathing right now? Like, this feels consuming. And so things like that is a little bit safer. As I say, keep it PG. Yeah. Language, most of the time you're good. Read the room. I actually say in my consultation calls, like, heads up, I cuss. Is that an issue for you? Let's get that out of the way right now. I
Mhm.
don't want you to be blindsided by it, but this is something I do. If you're uncomfortable, I'm going to make a note. I'm going to do my best, but also letting you know if something slips, I told you up front, right? Like,
Mhm.
I'll do my best. So language is a little bit more flexible, but the content, what I usually say is if you are making a joke, if you're doing some humor, a good rule of thumb is to make sure if it's at somebody's expense, make sure that it's your expense that it's at, right?
Mhm.
So we have to be really careful coming back to that power dynamic of making sure that we don't use humor to establish ourselves in a higher place of power. Like, I'm funnier or I'm smarter or I'm whatever.
Mhm.
And so if there's a joke, make sure it's at your expense, right?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think about when I'm like telling clients, we've maybe talked about them having a really hard conversation with
Mhm.
somebody in their life. I'll
Yep.
sometimes be like, all right, are you ready to hate me? Okay, here's the homework, and like to just like lob it up to also take the edge off.
Yes,
And it's
absolutely.
not at their expense. I'm not being like, not sure you're going to be able to do this well, like I'm
Yeah.
not, but I'm
Yeah.
like, I know you're going to hate me, like
Yep.
encouraging you to have this conversation.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And and it can be this lovely connection moment too of like if it's at your expense, right? Like, so when that client goes and does that thing that they didn't want to do, let's say it's having a really hard conversation with a family member, they go do it, and then they probably are thinking about you while they're doing it, and they're probably like, "Damn it, Maggie, you're the worst." Like, the whole time as they're having this uncomfortable conversation, they're like, "Why would you make me do this?" Right? Like,
Mhm. Yeah.
but then it's like, this is also a way that I got to go with that client now, of
Hmm.
I'm there with you, not physically, not actually in your brain, but like, you can pretend we're having a conversation. I told you you're going to hate me as you did this thing, right?
Hmm.
And so they have that difficult conversation the whole time in their head. They're like, you're the freaking worst. Why would you make me do this? This is so stressful. I can't handle it. And then I know you would say that I could handle it, right? Like, it can be
Hmm.
this whole dialogue that actually empowers them to stay in the situation because we're kind of with them, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a really different vibe than if I'm like, all right, so what do you think? Like as
Yep.
homework
Yeah.
to have that conversation with your mom, to
Yeah.
just like, let's schedule the day you're going to do it. Let's create
Yeah.
some accountability around it. It's a very
Yeah.
different vibe.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels
Absolutely.
more doable if you just can add some like dumb humor, y'all. It doesn't have to
Yeah.
be like that's nobody's laughing genuinely
Yeah.
about like, I hate you. Like it's
Yes. Yes.
but it
You're the
it
worst. I hate
adds
my therapist.
yeah, it adds a little like injection of humor. It makes it a little lighter, which can make it feel more doable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think so much of this is Our skill in monitoring the room and monitoring the relationship. If you're feeling it get too heavy and it's starting to feel like your client's eyes are glazing over, come back to this. Laughter will return their attention because of the dopamine. It will return their motivation and learning to the room. And so, let's say that you start saying, okay, when do you want to have this conversation with your mom? That's so hard. And you just start seeing the eyes glaze over, it can be like, man, it feels like I'm losing you, like just want to say I know it feels like this probably makes you want to barf. And I think you're still going to be really great at having this conversation, even if you're barfing. You're going to be really great, right? Like,
Mhm.
bring a trash bag. You got this,
Right.
of like, you just got to say it and then you can vomit on her and then she won't say anything back. There you go. Like
Uh-huh.
conversation over, but
Mhm.
you said your piece. Like, the biggest thing is just saying your piece. So some of it is reading that room. And like, if you feel like your client's eyes are glazing over, humor is a really good, quick way to bring them back into the room. Yeah.
Mhm. I love
Hmm.
that.
Yeah.
I am cognizant that like there are therapists who don't know how to read the room and they know they don't know how to read the room. Like they pay
Yeah.
attention to things clinically, like they feel like they know how to be clinical in session,
Yeah.
but they don't necessarily have comedic timing or they've
Hmm.
they don't have confidence in that.
Yeah.
How would you advise? Would you advise they like just hold off on the humor so they do no harm? Or would
Hmm.
you advise they do something to create that skill set?
Hmm. Hmm. And I think so much of this is individual and specific to the situation, right? If you have people to practice with, right? Like if you have a consult group, that's probably a better place to practice. If you got family or friends that you trust, that's probably a better place to practice. We don't want our clients to be our guinea pigs a little bit. Join an improv group, join a, comedy class, play, and begin like get some Barbie dolls out and play this out. Like, what could this look like? Do some dress rehearsals. And so I think some of it too of like if there's a therapist that doesn't have any comedy in their bones, right? No timing, no, I don't even know what I would say in this situation. Um, you're probably working with a very different client set than I am. Right.
Mhm.
And you're probably doing really, really wonderful work. And so I also want to come back to this. Comedy is and humor is not required to have really great therapeutic relationships.
Mhm.
It's not required for growth. None of that, especially if you work with a certain client population that, like, let's use an example, really distorts reality. Like, you say something and they take it very literally, right?
Mhm.
Your humor might look very different. You don't need to have a lot of comedic timing and say the right thing. Like, your humor is going to look different. And for some clients too, humor, like if you ask a client to repeat something back that you just said, and you're like, whoa, that is not what I said. Humor is probably not for your clients. And
Mm.
so, I like to emphasize, hey, humor is not required for people who have some humor in their bones and want to do some of this connecting with clients. What I mainly want to do is encourage you to use it thoughtfully, use it in a way that's going to help your client, like go for it. But it's also not required. And if you're just not naturally a funny person, if you want to be, that is your own personal work. Probably do that outside of the therapy room with your own therapist, with a comedy group, with a consult group, with family friends. Um, but it's not required. So,
Awesome. But if you've got that in you, then it's a really great opportunity to connect more clinically,
yes.
to enjoy work more,
Yeah.
and to help therapy clients kind of move along at
Yeah.
potentially a faster clip than they would otherwise.
Yes. And if you aren't naturally a funny person and you're wanting to be funny as a therapist, I think there's also some really great personal work here too. Are you missing play in your life? And
Mm.
that's something you need to reinfuse. Is there a self confidence thing you have around this? Just let that be information for you. Just get really curious about it. Play around with this idea of what if I was a funny person? What would that mean to me? Right. I think anything that comes up like this of like, okay, I want to use humor in my sessions. I have no idea how. Why? Explore that. That can be some really, really helpful things that once you pinpoint it and figure it out and work with it, that's now something that you can bring to your clients that maybe struggle with social cues, right? That maybe they can't read the room, right? Like you could probably be a great therapist for those people. And so I think really getting curious about it and using it in a way that's therapeutically helpful. Yeah, there are a lot of clients that also struggle with cues and don't have a funny bone in their body and probably very much want to. And you can speak to that experience better than any other therapist that has not had that experience. So.
I love that. Awesome. Maggie, thank you so much for being here. I hope that everybody listening or watching decides to just play a little bit more appropriately, respectfully, intentionally, bring that humor into session and see what happens for you and your clients.
Yeah. Yeah. Have fun with it. Like life is ridiculous. Have a little bit of fun with it. Like if none of us make it out alive, have some fun.
Love it. I hope that broadened your clinical horizons. Head over to notboringces.com to get your CE credit. Want to have a not boring conversation with me about your clinical area of expertise? You can apply there too. If you like this conversation, leave us a 5-star review, tell a friend, and be sure to subscribe for future conversations.